Okay, welcome everybody. Will Pye has left these lovely cards on the chairs, but I would invite you to put them in your bag or in your pocket and read them later. And I would invite you to put your phones away and your programs away, and for however long your life inspires you to be in this room, just to completely be here. And if you need to leave at some point, that's fine, but while you're here, just to be fully here. And oh, I'm supposed to remind you also to turn your cell phones off, please. And let's just take a moment to simply be here without trying to get any place, without trying to make anything happen, without trying to get into any special state of consciousness, without trying to get rid of anything that might be showing up, without trying to control whatever is going on in any way, but just to be here as it is. Breathing, not trying to control the breathing, but just letting it be however it is. Feeling the cool air or the warm air in the room. Sensations in the body, whatever they might be. In the belly, in the chest, the feet, hands. Hearing the sounds in the room, the sounds of this voice. A cough. Not seeing anything that happens as a distraction or an interruption, but as simply part of this seamless movement of life. And I would invite you to close your eyes for a moment. And see if you can find a boundary, an actual boundary, where what you think of as inside of you turns into what you think of as outside of you. Can you find an actual boundary? You can think of one, you can have a mental image of one, but when you look with awareness, with open attention, can you actually find it? Is there a boundary? Take a moment just to explore that. And if you feel into the sensation of your body meeting the chair, can you find a place in that sensation where your body ends and the chair begins? Again, take a moment just to explore that. Is there an actual boundary between you and the chair? In your own direct experience. And if you don't think about it, if you don't refer to secondhand information that you've learned, what are you right now? What is it that you most deeply refer to when you use the word I? At one level, of course, when we use the word I, we refer to the person. I went to the store, I came to the SAN conference, and so on. But more deeply than that, before your name, before you're thinking about it, right now, what are you? What is this? Does this awareing presence that is undeniably here and this present happening, which are not two separate things but one whole, does this awareing presence and this present happening, does it have an age, a gender, a life story? A nationality, a social class, a psychological problem? It takes thought and secondhand information to come up with all that, doesn't it? And without that, there's simply this boundless, awareing presence, this openness, this space, and this happening. There's no boundary. I mean, can you find a boundary between the sound of this voice and the awareness hearing it? Is the sound of this voice inside you or outside you? Can you say? Or is it simply right here? You can keep your eyes closed or open them, whichever you prefer. You might notice that it's always here now. Every different location, every event at the SAN conference, every event in your life, every moment of a journey from San Francisco to New York always happens here in this presentness, this immediacy that is synonymous with I, with the true I. The I that we all have in common, the I that is here prior to the story of me. And you might notice that it's always now. Every time of day, every season of the year, every age in your life, everything that happens now. Even the memory of yesterday or the imagination of tomorrow happens now. In this timeless eternity, that's the real meaning of eternity, now. Here now is always here now. And here now is synonymous with what we most deeply refer to with the word I. The form of here now is ever changing. It's never the same from one microsecond to the next. And there's no real boundary, as we discovered in our exploration a few moments ago now. As we discovered, there's no real boundary between one thing and another. There's no real place where Joan ends and the room begins. Or between Joan and what we think of as not Joan. It's one whole seamless happening, always here now. And when we look closely, we see that nothing even really forms as a persisting, independent, continuous, solid, substantial thing in the way we think it does. Because we have words that make it seem like we're pointing to solid, substantial, persisting things. We think that I, as a person, am a continuous, independent entity living in a world separate from me, made up of many, many, many things. But when we look closely, we can't actually find a boundary between what we think of as me and what we think of as the chair or the room or the air or the person next to us. Words or thoughts abstract and freeze this seamless whole into apparent bits. So it's like as if we froze a moment of a wave in the ocean and abstracted it out of the ocean and thought of that as me. But there's no such thing, really. The wave is a continuously changing movement, inseparable from the other waves and the whole ocean. We can't really get hold of a wave or find a place where it begins or ends. And the same is true of a person or a chair or a cloud or a giraffe or a microphone or anything. It's actually inseparable from everything else that is supposedly not it. And when we go deeply into any form or any sensation, at the core of it, there's really nothing. Nothing. But this nothing is not dead, it's this vibrant, alive nothing. Everything is empty of solidity, it's empty of independent existence. It's empty of self. It's empty of separation. It's empty of anything we can grasp, and yet it's vibrantly alive. This happening is vibrantly alive. And this nothing blossoms into this whole amazing everything. So that when we look for what am I, we are nothing that we can find in particular, and yet we are everything. The whole universe is happening in me, in you, in this vastness. And there's nothing that can be separated out, not really. Of course, in the play of life, in relative reality, it's important to be able to distinguish between a chair and a person, and to have healthy boundaries between oneself and other people, and so on and so on. And that's all fine, that's all part of the play. But more deeply, we can see that none of that is really there. And the person is like a wave on the ocean. It's a beautiful expression of this wholeness, in the same way that a tree or a flower or anything else is a beautiful expression of this wholeness. But the self that is often pointed to as non-existent or as a problem is the psychological self. It's the self that has stories about itself, that I am enlightened, or I'm not enlightened, or maybe I never will be enlightened, or I wish I were enlightened, or I'm not as enlightened as so-and-so, or I've ruined my whole life, or I should have gone to law school, but I didn't, and it's too late now, or I am a trauma survivor, or I am an alcoholic, or I am someone who doesn't handle money well, or I'm someone who is great with money, or whatever our stories are, those stories, and they may have some relative truth to them. It's not that we can dismiss them entirely, but they're all referring to this apparent, continuous, persisting, separate, independent entity that when we look for it, isn't actually here. We can't actually find it. So the Joan who was, a drunk many, many decades ago doesn't really exist anymore. Every cell in this body has changed, not to mention thoughts, feelings, sensations. And yet there can be the thought that I am the same person. I am that same person, and therefore I am this kind of person, and I have this problem, and so on. But when we look, that person doesn't actually exist. And the problem that we think we have, where is it right now? If we come back, and the words are never quite right because we can't actually ever leave here now, but if we come back with awareness to right here, right now, where's the problem that we think we have? Where's our identity? We have these identities as a man or a woman or a gender queer or an alcoholic or an ex-alcoholic or a failure or a success or an awakened one or a not quite awakened one, or whatever our identity we've picked up. But what is all that really? It's just a bunch of thoughts, stories, memories, mental images about an entity that we can't actually find when we look for it. Again, these things may all have a relative truth, and in certain ways it's important to acknowledge them and not to deny them or ignore them. But to also see that right now, none of that actually exists. This present happening, it has no gender, no age, no history, no problem. Or you could say it has every gender, every age, every history, every problem, every success, every possibility in the whole universe. It's everything and nothing. And it seems that consciousness, which is actually this whole manifestation, is consciousness showing up as what apparent multiplicity and all this colors and shapes and forms and stories and everything else. And it seems that consciousness has a tendency to become hypnotized by its own creations, to become mesmerized, caught up in its own stories, its own creations. But there's always the possibility right now, never in the future, never in the past, always right now, there's the possibility to simply notice that all of that is made up. It's all a fiction. There's just this right here, right now. And we're never not here. It's never not now. We are this seamless wholeness. And there's no one who can actually step out of this and be an enlightened one or an unenlightened one or a success or a failure. That's all a story. What does it even mean to be a success or a failure? It's all based on some story, some idea. But right now, there is no me. There's no success. There's no failure. There's no past. There's no future. There's just this. And this isn't to deny the story. Yes, I mean, it's important to learn from history so we don't have to reinvent the wheel every day or step into the same hole in the ground every day. Yes, it's important to be able to plan how to get to San Jose from wherever we came from. And it can be important to work on psychological issues that may be there. That all has its place. We're not denying any of that. But there's also the possibility in this moment right now of recognizing that we're already free, that there's nothing that's bound, there's nothing that needs to wake up, there's nothing that needs to be transformed into something else. And we're always being transformed into something else. Everything is constantly transforming. Many of the speakers last night spoke about the critical state of the world and humanity right now. But throughout recorded history, there have been empires that come and go. There have been despots and terrible leaders that have come and gone. There have been genocides and plagues and famines and horrible things and wonderful things that have happened. There have been periods in history where almost the entire human population was wiped out by famine and war. The only thing that's really different now is that we have nuclear weapons and climate change, and therefore we actually have the possibility of completely extinguishing life on Earth. And we think that would be a really bad thing to do. Probably most of us at the conference think that would not be so good, but really we don't know. I mean, if we were extinguished, something new would emerge. This whole, whatever this whole totality is, doesn't have a beginning or an end. At some point, the Earth itself will no longer exist. The sun will explode, as my father told me when I was very young. So there's nothing here, no thing here that's permanent. In fact, there's really no thing here, because anything that you think is here, if you really look at it, it's nothing but continuous change, inseparable from everything that's supposedly not it. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't care about the world or what's happening, or that we shouldn't take action if we are so moved. And when we really are awake to the beauty of, and the aliveness and the no division, the wholeness of this, naturally we feel that is love. That is love. Naturally, there's love and care. The opposite of that, hate and anger and all of that, comes out of some story of separation and otherness and me against them and all of that. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't care or act if we are moved to act. But at the same time, it's wonderfully freeing to realize that we don't really know what's going on here or what should happen next. We don't really know what's best for the universe. You know, we don't really know if many species have come and gone. The dinosaurs were wiped out. I'm sure from their perspective that wasn't such a great thing. But then something new emerged. We emerged. Humanity emerged. Now, some species might be thinking it would be a really nice thing if humanity was removed. And then maybe something new would come up. We don't know. We don't know how this all works. We don't know whether the situation is hopeless, as some believe, or whether there's great hope, as others believe. We don't know. We really don't know. We don't know whether there's going to be a massive shift in consciousness in the next second, and suddenly everything will dramatically transform, or whether that direction will be what we consider positive or negative. We don't know. We know that this manifestation shows up in polarities. It shows up in duality. It shows up, or apparent duality. It shows up. It can't show up any other way. You can't have just up without down. You can't have just left without right. You can't have a one-sided coin. There's no such thing. And you can't really find a place on the coin where heads turns into tails. They're actually they're one whole happening, one whole event. And we know from our own lives that some of the things that seemed terrible turned out to be sources of wisdom, humor, enlightenment, awakening, and some of the things that seemed like, oh, a great blessing, turned out to have a lot of side effects that we didn't necessarily anticipate. And the same is true for the world. So I think it's really helpful to have this bigger perspective, we could call it, and to recognize that whatever this is, it doesn't have a beginning or an end, and we're not in control of it. We, as the little imaginary me, who doesn't even exist. I mean, if you look for we think there's a me in here who's thinking my thoughts and making my choices and making my decisions and, you know, living my life and steering me down the watercourse of my life, and, you know, should have done this but did this instead, and that was a mistake, and blah, blah, blah. And there is some functional utility in the ability to identify certain things as a mistake. You know, if you back the car into a post, it's helpful to notice that that was a mistake so you don't do it again and all that. Again, that's relatively true. But really, the fact that you backed the car into the post at that moment was what the whole universe was doing at that moment. It was the way the ocean was moving at that moment. And to think that you somehow exist as this independent entity that could have done that differently at that moment is delusion. There may be a possibility of doing it differently at the next moment. That learning may happen, or it may not. You may back into the post again. And then the story may arise, oh, I'm such a stupid idiot, I backed into the post again. But that story, which is also just arising, is extra, because if you backed into the post again, that's what the universe was doing. There's really no you in the driver's seat. We kind of know this when we're driving a car, you know. You learn how to drive in driver's ed, and then when you're driving, you're not thinking, oh, I have to do this and this and this. You're just kind of driving. It's just happening. I remember being in a near crash once where I was on the freeway, you know, one of these Bay Area freeways, everything's going 80 miles an hour, and one of the cars next to me swerved and went all across all 4 lanes, and we're all just moving. However, I came through it unscathed, but believe me, it wasn't because I was thinking it through. I mean, it just happened. And the body, mind just moved as it moved. And someone else maybe wasn't so lucky, and again, that's also just the movement happening as it happens. And we can say, well, I had good luck and they had bad luck, but again, we don't really know what's lucky or unlucky. We think we know, but we don't really know. We don't know what this is. We have words, pure consciousness, awareness, the Tao, intelligence, energy, blah, blah, blah. But we don't really know what this is. And yet here we are, here it is, here this amazing happening. And it's very liberating to see how impersonal it is in a sense. That doesn't mean impersonal in the sense of cold and denying the reality, because the person can be free to be truly itself when, you know, it's the thought story of me that, and all the social conventions that come in that say, you know, you're supposed to be this kind of person and oh, you shouldn't do that, that feels constricted from this place of recognizing the impersonal nature of everything. The person is freer actually to be however it is, freely. Without the story that I shouldn't have done that, or that's not so good, or I should be a different kind of person. We're exactly how we are. And it's just thought that says it's good or bad, lucky or unlucky, enlightened or unenlightened. There's really no one here to be enlightened, which you could call that enlightenment, seeing that enlightenment. But you know, it's not like me then is enlightened. That's just another, again, deluded thought. There's no one here to be enlightened or unenlightened. There's simply this whole happening in which things, sometimes we could call them enlightened things or deluded things or mistakes or good moves. But again, that's a judgment made from our conditioning. We don't choose our conditioning. We don't choose what sources of news and information seem reliable to us and what ones don't. We don't choose the way we see life. It's just arising. And all of that we call our inner arising is inseparable from what we call the outer arising. It's one whole undivided happening without borders or seams. And it's never going to be all one way. It's never going to be all happy or all sad, all good or all bad. It's always a mix. And yet from this bigger perspective, on some level we could say it's all okay. It's all, or maybe more accurately, it's all what is. It just is as it is. But when we're awake to that bigger perspective and awake to the here-ness and the now-ness, that is love. That is love. And it's when consciousness falls asleep to that and gets hypnotized by the stories that we end up with conflict and war and so on and so on. But that too is part of what's happening. That falling into delusion and waking up again is part of this whole show. It's like a good movie. It's not all just happy, happy, happy. So it's all part of it. And the delusion is the grit that creates the pearl. It's part of the whole thing. You can't separate them. So anyway, it's wonderful to be here, and thank you all for coming, and oops.